This is Here's How, Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast, presented by William Campbell.
Thank you for downloading episode 56 of Here's How. This is part 2 of a double episode that I'm doing, looking at the Tuam baby story and the reaction of the press and of hardline Catholics who still insist that the story is a hoax, despite forensic evidence that has been uncovered confirming it.
Here's How is Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast. Make your view heard. Just dial 076 603 5060 and tell the world what you're thinking. Your voicemail may be included in the next podcast. You can find tips on recording your contribution and other ways to contact the show at here'show.ie/call.
I got a lot of reaction to the first part of my look at the Tuam baby story and the media coverage around it. Thanks for all the kind comments. I'm not going to go through them all. One poster on broadsheet.ie took issue with the precise comparison between the death rate of children in the Bon Secours home and the infant mortality in Ireland at the time. The first thing to say is that I never claimed that this was an exactly equivalent statistical comparison. There are lots of confounding factors. But I made that comparison to show that Brendan O'Neill's claim that life was equally grim inside and outside the home, I was showing that that claim was nonsense. It can be seen to be nonsense by the facts. The fact was that up to 1 child in 3 who was alive in the home at the start of the year was dead by the end of the year. And that shows that, when compared to the general infant mortality of 6.6% in Ireland in the 1940s, however bad general conditions in Ireland were at the time, that home was much, much worse. That same poster also wrote this: "You seem to suggest that the death rates in these institutions would have a significant impact on overall infant mortality rates. Tuam over 35 years generated 796 deaths, with a peak of 50 in 1943. In 1943 there were 64,000 live births in Ireland. Tuam's contribution to the infant mortality rate would be less than 1 in 1,000. Let's have a look at that. The poster is correct that there were about 64,000 births in Ireland in 1943. And given that infant mortality in the 1940s was 6.6%, that means there would have been about 4,250 cases of infant mortality in the whole of Ireland that year. In the Tuam home, there were 50 cases. So the Tuam mother and baby home alone, just that one home on its own, accounted for more than 1% of all the infant mortality in the whole country in 1943. I don't know where the poster is getting the less than 1 in 1,000 figure, but I suspect that he or she is another of the people who either can't count or hopes that you can't count. Given that we had 10 of these institutions, with just one of them accounting for more than 1% of all the infant mortality in the state, it's beyond question that their astronomical death rates skewed the infant mortality rate for the whole country upwards. Another claim was made that the horrendous death rates were caused by insufficient resources. We have to be careful about exactly what the words mean here. There can be absolutely no doubt about the miserliness of every aspect of life for the inmates in those homes. The Lafoy Commission into Child Abuse said that many of the witnesses, the victims, commented on their physical lack of stature, they were short, caused by childhood malnutrition, and half a century later the committee noted that the lack of physical stature was still observable. For sure, they didn't get fed enough, they suffered from lack of resources, but that doesn't mean that the resources weren't available. The Bon Secours Order is a fabulously wealthy organisation. They own the largest private hospital network in Ireland. It makes millions in profits. Michael Noonan, the finance minister, last week opened their new €21 million hospital in Limerick. But that's now. What resources did the Tuam home have to feed, clothe and educate the children then? In 1928, the Tuam home was being paid 10 shillings a week per child. How much was that worth? We know from the Connacht Tribune of the time that politicians were remarking on how high the cost was. For comparison, it's worth noting that agricultural labourers at the time were paid less than 15 shillings a week. That 15 shillings might have been keeping 2 adults and a clatter of children. But the 10 shillings a week that the Bon Secours nuns in Tuam got for each child wasn't their only income. As well as the taxpayers' money, the home seems to have profited from the huge fees that they made selling babies for adoption that they had either bullied or kidnapped from their mothers. Not to mention, the Bon Secours sisters also had the proceeds of the slave labour of women who were kept in the institution. They were running a business that had 0 labour costs. No surprise that they got so rich. So when Diarmuid Ferriter says that the terrible conditions were a feature of poverty, he's partly right. But that poverty was not a feature of insufficient resources. It was that the people who controlled those resources would rather let children die of malnutrition than let go of the money.
Do you agree? Do you disagree? If you want your point of view heard, dial 076 603 5060 and leave a contribution for the show. The lines are open 24/7 and you can find tips on how to record a good contribution and other ways to contact the podcast at here'show.ie/call.
On the line now, I have Bill Donoghue. He is the president and CEO of the Catholic League, which is based in New York. Bill, you were writing about the Tuam babies story on your website, and the headline of your story was "Ireland's mass grave story is fake news." Why were you saying that?
Well, because, number one, the government report that came out on Friday never mentioned anything about a mass grave. Catherine Zappone, who's the Minister for Children and Youth Affairs, in her formal remarks never mentioned anything about a mass grave, and the interim report of July 12, 2016 never mentioned anything about a mass grave. Now, I know where this comes from. It comes from Catherine Corless, but what's strange to me is this. In 2012, she wrote a journal article. I guess I'm one of the few who's actually read it. It wasn't a bad piece. The Journal of the Old Tuam Society. Never does she mention anything about a mass grave.
Can I just
now,
read to you?
2 years later, all of a sudden, we have one.
Okay, Bill, can I just read to you? This was on the foot of excavations done since December. The Mother and Baby Homes Commission of Investigation, they wrote about 2 structures, one of which they say is divided into 20 chambers and appears to be related to the treatment or containment of sewage or wastewater. In the second structure, significant quantities of human remains have been discovered in at least 17 of the 20 underground chambers which were examined. What is that if not a mass grave?
Well, let's take a look at the word significant. Well, how do we know what that means? I think we do, because Corless herself said in 2012 in her journal piece that she found a little graveyard with several small skulls, and the source for her thing, the whole guide, everything turns on is this fellow Mr. Sweeney, and he was asked about this, and he said, "Yeah, I heard about the 800 skeletons down that hole." This is an exact quote. "There was nothing like that. About 20." And then he told the New York Times,
Hold on a second. This is somebody who, as a child, discovered
Barry
some
Sweeney,
bodies.
When Barry was 10 years of age, he and his friend were playing, and they came across this big hole, and they looked down there, and they saw 15 to 20 skulls. Now,
it's possible that a child would not have. Surely, it's possible that a child would not have gone any further when they saw 15 to 20 skulls. And what the excavation, which is a professional forensic investigation, has found is significant quantities of human remains in at least 17 of 20 different underground chambers. That's just not consistent with that. And surely the word decades later of a 10-year-old child has to be superseded by a forensic investigation.
What I want to know is this: why is there such incuriousness on the part of the reporters in the UK and the US. Why wouldn't anyone? I don't know of a single reporter who's ever asked Corless my question. Why did you change your story after you interviewed Sweeney, saying you saw several small skulls in a little graveyard? How did that become 800 bodies in a mass grave?
Well, if I may
No
explain,
one bothered to ask her that.
Well, as I understand it, what she did was she paid quite a large amount of money, several thousand euro, to obtain records, and discovered that there were 796 death certificates which had no matching burial records. And
that might be the case.
And she is from the place and from her local knowledge, and she said that there was a likelihood that these bodies were disposed of in whatever manner in these underground chambers that were originally designed for essentially sewage treatment.
If she had evidence of a mass grave, she would have played it in her journal article, but she didn't. Look, I have a doctorate in
surely
sociology,
the evidence of the mass
grave.
grave.
I look at evidence and data. There is no evidence. She makes claims, unsubstantiated claims.
But the forensic dig, Bill, the forensic dig has confirmed that there is a large quantity of human remains in at least 17 of 20 different underground chambers.
And here's my objection, sir.
Yes.
I've been hearing online, this is going on for the last couple of years, the Irish Holocaust, and all this sensationalism about mass grave. There isn't any mass grave. And if there were a mass grave, the government of Ireland would have admitted it by now. They haven't done it. They didn't do it in their interim report. She provided no evidence. She said there were little graveyards of several skulls. Her lead guy, Barry Sweeney, undercuts her and says, no, I didn't see 800 there. The local police said this is impossible. So I'm raising questions about why aren't the people in the media demanding more evidence from Ms. Corless?
Well, Ms. Corless is an amateur historian, and what has happened is that professional forensic experts have investigated because there seems to be something to this. But, for example, the nuns who owned and ran that hired a high-powered PR consultancy called the Communications Clinic. Their PR wrote to the media, to various media outlets, saying, and this is a quotation from her letter, if you come here, you'll find no mass grave, no evidence that children were ever buried. Now, in fact, 2 years before she wrote that letter, Sister Mary Ryan, who is the country leader of the Bon Secours nuns in Ireland, wrote to a woman who was seeking information about where her brother may be buried, and Sister Mary Ryan wrote, as I understand it, therefore there would be a good possibility that his remains were buried at the small cemetery at the home itself. This is located at the back of the home and was operated as a general grave.
Right.
So that.
But I don't see how that's evidence of a mass grave.
Well, a general grave appears to me to
had grave
refer
sites
to
all over Ireland in these places. Obviously, these poor children, many of them, it's disturbing that anybody would be in any kind of septic tank. But let me tell you something else.
Mm-hmm.
That septic tank was closed in 1937, and they didn't start anything until 1926. According to the records, something like 204 children were supposedly put into that sewer. How can you have a working sewer with over 200 bodies in it? Something doesn't add up here.
Well, surely the people to answer that are the forensic experts who are analysing that.
Right, and I'm just wondering why they didn't play this card on Friday.
When you say play this card, Bill, one thing I want to do is to have a constructive discussion, and it comes across to me that you've got a very combative style. And, for example,
I do.
The bishop, the Roman Catholic bishop of Limerick, Brenton Leahy, said in the past couple of days, we hang our heads in shame. Do you think he's anti-Catholic in some way?
No. Look. Every other day you'll find a Catholic bishop apologizing about something. I mean, that's their natural stuff. I'm a social scientist. I want to see the evidence. Why didn't Corless make this claim when she wrote her journal article in 2012? And why hasn't anyone asked her what happened between 2012 and 2014 to change your story? I've suggested that there is a reason.
What is that?
In January 2014, she finally met up with Martin Sixsmith. He's the author of that fairy tale about Philomena, upon which they made the movie. And they try to tell America and the world that poor Philomena, the child, was taken from her, stolen by these horrible nuns, and she went to the United States.
That's a matter of record.
For her son. No, it's believe me, sir, I can prove this. And I've written about this.
It's a matter of record that children were taken from their mothers. The mothers were told that the children were dead, and the children were illegally adopted.
I have a picture of the contract. She signed a contract at the age of 22. She voluntarily gave her child up to the nuns, and then they took care of the child, and then they gave her gainful employment. And she never set foot in the United States of America until January of 2014, when she came over here to hawk the movie about her life. She never went looking for her son. All of this has been documented. And all I'm saying is that Sixsmith has an animus against the church. He hangs out with Lee. All of a sudden, she's got this anger about the church. There wasn't any anger in her article in 2012. Something
You're
happened
referring to Catherine Corless.
between 2012 and 2014.
Bill, would you accept the point that there was horrible things done by the nuns in these homes?
Let me tell you what, I'm skeptical, and I'll tell you why. First of all, I don't doubt there was some cruelty, because cruelty was the way a lot of people throughout the Western world did act, unfortunately, in the early part of the 20th century. But I will say one thing. Unlike a lot of people who are pretty lazy in the UK and the US, I've actually read the McAleese report, and I found out there wasn't one evidence that a single woman was sexually assaulted by these nuns. In fact, it came out just the opposite. Well, no, but I'll tell you, the conditions that were described, prison-like and everything else, it wasn't supported. I actually read the report. And
can I read, Bill, can I read just from one woman who was an inmate in one of these orphanages? Her name was Mary Merritt, and I'll provide a link for the quotation. But she says, "I was in one of the orphanages, which they called industrial schools in those days. I was so hungry that I stole some apples from the orchard. The nuns told me that they had found a situation for me and sent me to the High Park Laundry in Dublin and told me that I had to stay there until I learned not to steal. They kept me there as an unpaid worker for 14 years. You don't even get that for murder these days." She remembers that the work was so hard and the regime so cruel that she broke a window and ran away to the town, where she asked a priest for help. The priest raped her. The nuns did not believe her when she was picked up by the police and returned to the laundry. That was a story that happened in variations to an enormous number of women for a prolonged period. Isn't the Bishop of Limerick right to say we hang our heads in shame? Well, listen, if the horror stories, if something like that actually happened, obviously it's indefensible and those people are contemptuous. But I am simply saying this. I'm not there. You're not there. We're talking about a long time ago. I read the government report, and those kinds of accounts that you just described, horrible as they are, they're not in the report. So you can understand why I'm a bit curious. I look at the Magdalene Laundries thing. I look at the Philomena thing, and Sixsmith making up the lies about Philomena Lee. Now I find all this Irish Holocaust at mass grave. There is no mass grave. I'm sitting here saying, Bill, you're arguing against observable facts. A mass grave has been found, that there is a large volume of human remains in 17 of 20 underground chambers. There was a significant number, and I don't know what the word significant means, but to say that you've got 15 to 20 skulls, and now you jump to 800, and there's a mass grave, but you don't have any evidence of it, if there were evidence, she would have played it in 2012. Well, first of all, she wasn't a forensic scientist who did an archaeological dig, which is what has been done in the past couple of months. But she didn't make that conclusion based on excavational research. No, she based it on documentary research and her local knowledge. She never reported it. I don't know how many times we have to go around this. She had an opportunity in a journal to provide the evidence, and she couldn't do it. Sure. She changed her story. Well, and you're right. You're right. We shouldn't go around, Bill, perhaps because he was a child. But you're right that we shouldn't go around in circles. But what has happened now is that, as you say, a significant number of human remains in at least 17 of 20 underground chambers. So that means that there's far more than, clearly there's far more than 20 bodies there. And in any case, in Ireland until 2014, there was a legal requirement that all bodies buried should be buried in a wooden coffin. Clearly that law was breached.
Well, that may be. My only argument is this, and I'm not trying to defend everything. I'm simply saying that there's a tremendous leap from 15 to 20 bodies to 800. And
yes.
I'm looking for the evidence, and I don't see any.
But can I explain that to you, that the figure of 15 to 20, which was seen in essentially in an instant by a child or two children, and the 800, or it is speculated, there is not, the number of bodies has not been confirmed by the forensic dig, but the documents indicate 796 death certificates that have no matching burial record. And this appears to be, given that there's a significant number of bodies in 17 of 20 underground chambers, that this appears to match up.
Listen, if I don't know who Barry Sweeney is, but Corless said that was her source. So after he is told by the Irish Times that you've got 800 skeletons down that hole, he says nothing like that, about 20. When he's asked by the New York Times, he says there's maybe 15 to 20 small skeletons. Now, if that's her source and he's contradicting her, why would I have any credibility? Why would she have any credibility with people like me?
Sure. Well, perhaps
that's her source.
Well, perhaps put that aside entirely and just give credibility to the documentation and to the forensic dig.
Well, there's obviously a problem there. The question is it as sensationalistic as some of the most scurrilous reports have been? I find it interesting in that in this country, in the United States, the Associated Press is the one most responsible for flagging this. Just a couple of years ago in 2014, it had to issue apologies for its factually incorrect statements about the Tuam story. The only newspaper, by the way,
incorrect?
A lot of things that had issues. It was a pretty lengthy apology. The only newspaper, which I find this is striking, because I'm not exactly a big fan of the New York Times, are not exactly Catholic friendly, although they do have a lot of reporters and they've done good work over the years. But the New York Times would be normally, editorially speaking, prepared to believe the worst about the Catholic Church. I will give New York Times credit in 2014, and I'm going to give them credit in 2017.
Why is that?
They don't report anything about a mass grave because there wasn't any. They stand almost alone. I'm going to come out with a report on this tomorrow, looking at how everybody just mouths what somebody else puts out there. If AP says it, therefore it has to be true. Why do we have so many lazy and incompetent reporters who don't do any independent fact-checking? And somebody ought to call us on this.
Bill, one thing you say that the word mass grave is not used in the official report, and that's true. But if I accuse you, Bill, of taking a gun and going into a bank and pointing the gun at the bank teller and telling the bank teller to give you all the money, and you put the money in a sack and you walk out, if I accused you of that, that would be pretty much the same as accusing you of robbing a bank, but I can do that I can use descriptive words without using the single noun or the single phrase robbing a bank. If you say there are significant quantities of human remains in 17 of 20 underground chambers, that is saying, in effect, there is a mass grave.
We have three different numbers. Let's play the number game. We have Sweeney, says 15 to 20. We have the report from Ireland on Friday, significant number. And then we have Corless,
who is
800. 800.
Yes.
800 and significant number are not exactly in the same ballpark, although 15 to 20 would be a significant number. Would you agree on that?
Well, we know that 15 to 20 is incorrect because there are bodies because there are bodies, plural, in each of at least 17 to 20 underground chambers. Plural means at least 2, so that means that there is far more than 15 to 20 bodies.
I think it would have been helpful if the government gave us more clarity in terms of what do they mean by significant number. Maybe the reason they can't do so is not because they're lying. It's just that it's very difficult to make these determinations.
I think you're correct on that.
But it certainly wasn't difficult for Corless.
She has provided documentary evidence of what she's saying, that there are death certificates with no matching burial records.
She provided documentation of a mass grave. If there were a mass grave, then the government would have said that on Friday, and so would the.
They did say that on Friday.
What's her name? The Minister for Children and Youth Affairs.
Catherine
The police looked at this thing a couple of years ago. The local police. Now, I'm not saying they're necessarily right, but they looked at this thing and they said there is simply no confirmation from any source that there are between 750 and 800 bodies present. That was the report from 2014.
Let's put that aside, Bill, because I don't think we're going to agree on that. But can I ask you one generalized question?
Sure.
Do you think that the way that you present that story, and you I think you agreed that you were combative in style, but great wrongs were done. And do you think that a little bit of contrition and a little bit of admission of those great wrongs would serve the Catholic Church? And you run an organization called the Catholic
I don't think
League.
so.
Do you think that would serve you better?
No, I don't. And I'll tell you why. I think amongst reasonable people, what you say, sir, is true. I can't argue with you on that. But I'm saying that there's a strong segment of the population in the United States and overseas which is strongly anti-Catholic. And for them, this is almost like blood in the water. They're going to go out there for the kill. They'll never be satisfied. What do you think about the Orthodox Jews in Brooklyn who have been raping kids left and right? Nobody wants to report on it, and they have their own rabbinical courts. Can you imagine the Catholic Church having its own canonical courts? They'll punish you if you go there. But nobody wants to deal with it. In the public schools, this goes on all the time. And, they said that there was, 3 to 35 or so, from 35 months, a fetal body up until 3 years. You talk about apologizing for horrors. Why aren't the people in the United States and the UK apologizing for the mass slaughter of innocent human beings that's taking place right now?
Bill, there's a word.
I'm talking about child abuse in the womb.
Bill, there's a
abortion.
Word. I know what you're talking about, Bill, and the word that we use in Ireland for that is whataboutery. That when somebody is blamed for something, they say, well, my sins don't count because I can point at somebody else who is sinning. That may be a clever rhetorical point, but it's indefensible morally.
I think abortion is indefensible, yes.
What I'm saying is that what the Catholic Church in Ireland did, defending, hiding and protecting paedophiles, is indefensible morally.
But they weren't paedophiles. They weren't. They were homosexuals. We have to get our language correct, sir.
Well, let's
they weren't pedophiles. They were homosexuals.
Well, let's agree on the word rapists.
Okay.
Which
child
is,
abusers, whatever you want.
Yes.
Somebody who grabs somebody's behind. That's thrown in there. By the way, that inappropriate touching, which I am not going to justify. I mean, I would have thrown half these guys out of the priesthood had it my way.
Sure, but you're not responsible for that, Bill. And the one thing I do want to acknowledge, Bill, is that I've contacted other journalists who covered this in probably a reprehensible way, and you had the courage of your convictions to speak to me, and several others didn't. So I just want to thank you for that. And
well, I would call out those ones who were cowards, because if you can't go on with a guy like you're very reasonable, then I wouldn't believe them either.
Well, thank you for that, and thank you for speaking to me.
Thank you, sir.
Make your view heard. Record your own contribution and email it to podcast@here'show.ie. You can find tips on how to record a good contribution and other ways to contact the podcast at here'show.ie/call.
That's almost the end of episode 56 of Here's How, Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast, published on the 13th of March 2017. I have a link to Bill Donoghue's article that we discussed, and links to other information that I quoted in the show notes for this episode on the website. If you can think of a topic that you think should be covered in a future show, or if you want to suggest someone to include, and that could be yourself, then let me know. If you like the podcast, please go on iTunes and give it a rating, or even write a nice review. Also, please like the show on Facebook. Please follow the podcast on Twitter @Here's How Podcast. Follow Bill Donoghue's Catholic League @Catholic League, and subscribe to the podcast so new shows automatically come up in your podcast feed. You can use iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, or any other podcast app or software. If you don't know how to do that, there's full instructions, recommendations for free podcast software, and contact details for the show, all at www.here'show.ie. The next show will be uploaded shortly. The Here's How podcast is produced and presented by me, William Campbell. Thank you for listening.